Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're joining us from. Welcome to the first of the March webinars for the International Society for British Genealogy and Family History's winter webinar series. My name is Christine Woodcock, and I'm going to be moderating and hosting. And today we have with us Dr. Maurice Gleeson. Many of you will know Maurice. He was an instructor at British Institute a couple of years ago. Maurice is going to be doing his DNA British Institute virtually for us this year in September 8th and 9th. And just as a lead up to that, Maurice is going to give us an overview of what he will be spending his time on those 2 days. Welcome, Maurice.
Thank you very much, Christine. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak once again at the British Institute. It's a real pleasure.
Right, and I will just let you take it away. Just before I do, though,
Sure.
People who are looking for a handout, you'll find it in the panel just above the chat box. It says handouts. You can open that, save it to your computer, or print it out. If you're not able to do that, please send me an email after, and I will be happy to send that to you. All right, Maurice, you can take it away.
Cool. And just on that last note, I will be giving doing a 50 to 100 word summary on each of the 8 talks that I'll be doing. And I guess you'll be putting that up on the website, Christine?
We will. And also, this webinar is recorded. And normally for our winter webinar series, we've been the webinars are free to attend on the day of, and then the recording becomes a member benefit. But because we're using this to promote your talks, we will have that on the public side of the website as soon as the recording is ready, so people can watch it at any time.
Great, that's fine. And then probably tomorrow, I will be sending you the breakdown of each of the talks so that can go up on the website as well, and it'll be a nice complementary addition to the actual video itself.
Fabulous, thank you.
Great, well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody out there, wherever you may be. It's great to be back at the British Institute. I really enjoyed the actual presentation I did 2 years ago now. It was in Utah, but this year it'll be virtual. And what I'll be doing is a series of 8 presentations spread over 2 days, the 8th and 9th of September. And each of the days will take the format of a lecture starting about 9 o'clock in the morning, going on for an hour, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end as well. Then there'll be 30 minutes break. Next presentation will be at 10:30, goes on for an hour, including the Q&A. And then we'll break for lunch between 12 and 1. And then at 1 o'clock, we'll have the 3rd talk of the day, and then another half-hour break. And then at 2:30, we'll be having the last talk for the break. So we'll be winding up at around about 3:30 in the afternoon. And that will be Eastern Standard Time, I believe, which will be 6 hours behind me. I'll be going to bed after the last presentation. But we will be covering quite a few topics, and really what I really want to talk about for this virtual institute is how to effectively use DNA in your family tree research. So many of you, probably the majority of you, will have done a DNA test already, and you're probably faced with thousands of matches. And for everybody that does a DNA test, the real challenge is, how do you organize these matches? How do you manage these matches? And how do you make them work for you? And that really is what the 2-day workshop is going to focus on. And it is largely going to focus on autosomal DNA, which is the test that you get from Ancestry. You get it from MyHeritage as well, and 23andMe and Living DNA and Family Tree DNA as well. But with those last 3, 23andMe and Living DNA, they do give you your Y DNA and your mitochondrial DNA as well, and Family Tree DNA does that too. We will be talking a little bit about Y DNA and mitochondrial DNA, but the focus of these 8 lectures is going to be on autosomal DNA and how you can effectively use your matches with your family tree research. And the reason why we're focusing on autosomal DNA is because it is the most frequently used of all of the 3 main DNA tests, and it's what most of you are probably interested in. But we will talk a little bit about mitochondrial DNA and a little bit about Y-DNA as well. So these are the 5 major companies that provide these direct-to-consumer tests. And then, of course, up here we have a GEDmatch as well. GEDmatch is a third-party tool, if you like, a third-party website. It was recently sold to Verogen, but it continues to serve the genetic genealogy community as it has done for many years. And this is a repository where you can upload any of your DNA results from any of the direct-to-consumer companies. So it's a good way of comparing your DNA results across the different platforms. So those are the 5 main direct-to-consumer companies and GEDmatch. And the topics we'll cover in these 8 presentations are, first of all, what is your goal? What is your goal doing family tree research in the first place? And looking at the ways that DNA might certainly be able to help you achieve some of those goals. We'll be looking at maximizing your exposure to the DNA databases. We'll be talking about privacy, anonymity, and data protection. We'll be talking about unleashing the power of ethnicity estimates, which are getting much more refined than they used to be initially. We'll also look at how to go about sorting your matches into the paternal side of your family, the maternal side of your family, and even assigning matches to a particular ancestral line, which can help you focus research on a particular ancestral line of interest. There have been a variety of different tools that have been introduced over the course of the last few years since autosomal DNA came on the scene just over 10 years ago now. And we'll be looking at a lot of these tools in great detail because they can really help you manage and organize your DNA matches. We'll also be looking at how do you actually combine the DNA records with the paper records, because DNA really at the end of the day is just an extra tool for your genealogical toolkit. And what you need to do is you need to always go back to the paper records, and that means combining DNA with the documentary evidence that is the mainstay of mainstream genealogy. One of the biggest challenges with these thousands of matches is actually engaging them in conversation in the first place. I'm sure a lot of you have the experience of writing or messaging a match and you never get any reply, and this may be the one match that is going to solve the family mystery, and it can be incredibly frustrating messaging these people, writing to these people, and they never give you any kind of response whatsoever. So we'll be looking at that and coming up with ways that you can hook your matches and keep them engaged in a conversation. And like I say, we'll also look at Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA, and also the DNA associated with the X chromosome. All of these have their part to play in helping us interpret our autosomal DNA results. And then throughout these presentations, I'll be highlighting the key take-home messages associated with each aspect of managing your DNA matches and illustrating them with case studies throughout my 8 presentations. So those are the topics that we'll be covering. And this is my family tree. It's possibly your family tree as well. You can see that here's me down here, born around about 1960, and then allowing 30 years per generation. I've gone back to about the 1800s with the majority, with about 50% of my family lines, but there are some gaps, and especially with the women, all I have is a first name and no surname. And I'm sure that many of you are in exactly the same situation, where you have brick walls for particular ancestors, and for a lot of the women, you don't actually have their maiden name. So these are the kind of brick walls that we can break through using DNA, and we'll be talking a lot about how you can actually use DNA to break through these brick walls. And one of the main reasons why I love using DNA is not only just does it break through these brick walls and take me back an extra generation, or in one situation, it actually took me back. I hit a royal line, so it took me back to Princess Diana. And that was really quite a very pleasant surprise. I've always admired her. I think she was a great leader, especially for women. And it was nice to be associated with somebody that you admire. So that was a very nice brick wall to break through. Another reason for connecting with cousins and trying to augment your family tree research is photographs. I don't have photographs of a lot of my ancestors, and it's something that I would like to have, and it's always something that I'm looking to augment. So using DNA to find like-minded genealogical researchers who actually have photos of ancestors that you never knew that the photos existed. That is another great bonus of doing this type of work and using DNA to get in touch with people who may have essential information. Essential information that maybe solve a family mystery. And there are quite a few family mysteries in my family tree. And I'm hoping at some point that we will be able to solve a few of them. Some of them include adoptions and illegitimacies, and certainly I'll be talking about several adoption mysteries that I solved in my own particular family during the course of the presentations. And they were very, very gratifying family mysteries to resolve. So again, that's another reason for using DNA to assist you with your family tree research. And of course, a lot of people are interested in their deep ancestral roots. Where did my father's 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 line originate from? Where did my mother's 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 line originate from? And if you break through the right brick wall, it can take you very far back in time into periods in history that you never really considered your ancestors lived through. And finding these gems really opens up your family tree, and it makes it a much richer place to be, and it gives you an insight into what our ancestors lived through in ways that you never would have imagined. So that's another reason for doing DNA and trying to break through some of these brick walls. One of the big questions that, and we've kind of dealt with this, is why do you do this research in the first place? And it's to find these rare sources of information. For example, somebody out there might have the family Bible, and DNA might very well put you in touch with that particular cousin. Old photographs, we've talked about old photographs as well, and this is a photograph of my grandfather when he was quite a young man, and this is taken probably in the 1890s. This is the Burke's peerage and baronetage of Great Britain and Ireland, and if you can connect to somebody in Burke's peerage, then that will take you back many, many generations back into the past, and like I say, provide you with a very rich history that you may not have ever imagined. Now, I work professionally with adoptees, and one of the first people to get in touch with me was a lady from California, and here she is here, Winnie, and she's got a wonderful YouTube video. Some of you may have seen it already, but within days, well, in fact, as soon as she got her DNA results back, she had a half nephew as her top match, and within days of getting her results, she was reconnected with family that never knew that she existed, and she never knew that they existed, and she was introduced to 4 half siblings over the course of the next several weeks, and it really enriched her life. It brought a lot of closure, and it was very, very enriching experience. And here you see her looking at a photo album of her mother for the first time. So hugely emotional. And a lot of adoption stories are like that. But of course, DNA doesn't just help adoptees. It can help anybody who has an illegitimacy within the family. So, for example, if your father was adopted, or if your father was illegitimate, or your grandmother was a foundling and found on the steps of the church, it is possible to use DNA to actually find out who the parents of your ancestor were. So we'll be looking at techniques and methods that we can use to help adoptees find their birth family, but also to help you discover the biological family of illegitimacies and similar kind of events in your own family tree as well. And lastly, of course, you want to find that third cousin who has the holiday home in Hawaii. One of the great benefits of connecting with cousins, either through DNA or through the family tree, is that you can visit them. And this is something that myself and my dad have done over the last 15 years since I took up genealogy. He met a second cousin he hadn't seen in 60 years, and she gave him 20 letters that they had in the attic that his mother had written in the 1920s. We visited Los Angeles to meet second cousins we'd never met before. So it creates social outlets, and visiting these cousins and sharing your knowledge about the family tree with them, I certainly find that a very, very gratifying aspect of family tree research. So where does DNA fit in? DNA can give you a breakthrough in your family tree research. It can be an extra tool for your genealogical toolkit. It can point you in the right direction, and that in turn helps you focus your genealogical research in the documents. And that's a very, very important aspect of DNA. It's not going to give you all of the answers. It's not like you do a DNA test and you get your family tree, unless maybe your second cousin has done your family tree. But then he'll only have done it on one side, and you'll still have the other side of your family to research yourself. So DNA cannot be used in isolation, and it's most often used in conjunction with paper records. And so we'll be looking at how do you actually combine the two together, and I'll be giving you a few examples from Irish genealogical research, which can be particularly difficult because a lot of the records were destroyed, and most people have difficulty getting beyond 1850 or thereabouts. But by using DNA, I've certainly made quite a few remarkable breakthroughs in my own Irish family tree, and I'll be sharing some of those stories with you, and also discussing specifically how do you combine DNA with documentary evidence using the example of Irish paper records as an example. So these are the various, the 5 major direct-to-consumer DNA companies, and this is their growth over time. And you can see since about 2016 or so, there's really just been an exponential growth in this whole market. But it has been slowing down in the last year or so, and those are the projected figures for 23andMe. And part of the slowdown has been because of the advent of law enforcement using some of these DNA databases. So we'll be talking about that and talking about the implications of what this means for our work, for our genealogical work. But you can see that certainly the current status is that Ancestry have about 16 million people in their database. 23andMe would have around about 11 million. MyHeritage is just short of 4 million. And then Family Tree DNA is actually just short of 2 million. And then GEDmatch has about 1.3 million people currently in their database. So if you add all of that up, you've got 2, 4, 11, and 16. You're going to be around about, let's say 16, 11 is 27, and 4 is 31, and 2 is 33. You're going to have about 33 million people in these databases. And certainly compared to when I first started, it's much easier to find DNA matches, close DNA matches in the databases today compared to what it was like, say, 5 years ago or so. So we have a huge resource out there with the current status of the databases, and they're growing by about 1 million people per year. So in each of the major companies. So next year we're at least going to be up to 35, if not 36, and then the year after we might be up to 40 million people in the databases. So it is a continuing process. Now it's very important because you have such large gene pools, if you like, in these databases, to fish in all the pools, because you never know in which pool the big fish is going to be swimming in. And you want to catch the big fish that solves that family mystery for you. And you also want to do it safely. And we'll be spending some time talking about privacy, anonymity, and how to optimize it. And this topic has really come to the forefront because of law enforcement use of the DNA databases, specifically GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. Blaine Bettinger gave a very useful talk at RootsTech just recently, 2 weeks ago or so, and that is available online. So on that particular link there, you can actually hear Blaine's talk. Gives a very nice summary of everything that is happening in the law enforcement universe at the moment as far as DNA is concerned. In law enforcement, they call it investigative genetic genealogy. And it's not applied just for finding the perpetrators of crimes. It's also looking at the victims of crimes and also unidentified human remains. So Jane Does, John Does, that type of thing. And it's bringing closure to a lot of families who have been missing a loved one for many, many years. And in actual fact, one of the first successes was with a girl who was nicknamed Buckskin Girl because she'd been wearing a buckskin jacket, and her murder had been unsolved for 37 years until genetic genealogy came along, and people set up a company called the DNA Doe Project, and one of their first cases was Buckskin Girl, and within 4 hours of getting her results on GEDmatch, they were able to identify her. So 37 years of forensic genetics failing to discover who she was, within 4 hours genetic genealogy was able to identify this woman. And that really emphasized to a lot of people the power of genetic genealogy to bring closure in these missing persons cases, these unidentified human remains cases, and bring closure to the families involved. Then, of course, it's also been used much more sensationalistically to identify perpetrators of crimes. And the most famous of these was the Golden State Killer, and you'll see him appearing in the news from time to time as he progresses towards his court case, which will be sometime in this year, I believe. But several cases have already come to conclusion, and various people have been convicted, not on the basis of the genetic genealogy evidence, but on the basis of subsequent forensic DNA testing that was done. Because all that genetic genealogy will do is it will give you a tip, an investigative lead. It will point you in the right direction. And then the police will have to go back, approach the person and do a forensic genetic test. And that forensic genetic test is the data that will be used in court to convict the individual. So genetic genealogy is just a pointer. In very much the same way as for us as genealogists, it points us to the right record set to look in. But we're relying on the documentary evidence to actually confirm what the DNA is saying. You should look in this direction, and then we go to the documentary evidence and we see that the DNA was right, and we've found the proof, the documentary proof, that we have broken through a brick wall or that we have caught a serial killer, as the case may be. So DNA is always used as a pointer. You will have to go back to the documentary records to find the actual documentary proof. Now, I've written a blog post that some of you may be familiar with about how to optimize your anonymity and privacy with DNA tests, and we'll be looking at some of these hints and tips to optimize your privacy during the course of these presentations. And that allows you to fish safely in the gene pool. It means that you don't have to be worried all the time about your data being compromised, and you can fish as privately as you want to, and as anonymously as you want to, depending on your own level of comfort. So it very much depends on what you want to do. And I think, as we've seen with COVID-19 and the coronavirus, there's a lot of discussion in the media. And of course, when there's discussion in the media, people start worrying whether it's a real concern or not. And we've seen the same thing with a variety of other conditions as well. And then everything dies down. When they brought out closed circuit television, there was a huge public debate about this is a breach of privacy, this is an invasion of privacy, and now nobody talks about closed circuit television at all, CCTV. So a lot of these things raise concerns in the early period of discussion, public discussion, and a lot of these concerns later turn out to be not that relevant to everybody's day-to-day life. So hopefully the same thing happens with coronavirus, but the same thing may very well apply to the use of DNA for investigative genetic genealogy. It's always wise to be cautious. It's always wise to put in necessary safeguards. But I think some of the safeguards that people are putting in are probably unnecessary. But again, it very much depends on your own level of comfort. And we'll be looking at various things that you can do to optimize your anonymity and your privacy. We'll also be talking briefly about the science behind, let me just change that for a second. I know exactly what's going wrong. It says slideshow use narrations. We don't want to play narrations at all. So we will put that back now, and we were up to here, yes. So there we go. So we're back. We will talk briefly about basic science behind DNA. It's not absolutely essential that you understand everything about basic science, but I think it's good to know. You can still get the maximum benefit from your DNA without knowing the intricacies of basic science behind it, but it's good to know exactly a little bit of basic science so that it helps you understand what you're looking at. So we will spend a lecture talking about some of the basic science aspects of genetic genealogy, but we won't be spending too much time on that. We'll also be mentioning Y DNA, we'll be mentioning mitochondrial DNA, but we'll be focusing primarily on autosomal DNA, and that will be the main focus of all the presentations. But Y DNA and mitochondrial will be mentioned as a kind of a sideline, We'll be looking at DNA inheritance and looking at things like how much DNA do you get from each of your ancestors. We'll be looking at the amount of DNA that you inherit from each ancestor. For example, your 4 times great grandmother passes on 50% of her DNA to each of her children, but by the time it reaches you, you only have about, on average, 1.5% of DNA from your 4 times great grandmother. And it's inherited in segments, so we'll be looking a little bit about how these segments are generated, and that means talking about independent assortment and recombination and crossing over. So we'll spend a little time on the basic science behind that. We'll also be looking at how much DNA you share with each of your relatives. And so, for example, with your first cousin, you share 12.5%. With your 5th cousin, you share 0.05%. We'll be looking at how many cousins will the test detect and what percentage are involved. And that will just help you understand the dynamics of DNA testing, and why you have thousands of distant cousins, but not so many close cousins. We'll be talking about ethnicity estimates and the correlation with surname distribution maps. Because certainly with Ancestry, they have developed some very interesting techniques that have made the whole ethnicity estimate area quite different to what it was like 2 or 3 years ago. And their use of things called genetic communities is actually helping to really pinpoint which counties in Ireland and in the UK that your ancestors may have come from. And this is an example from an adoptee that I was working with. And he had 2 hotspots. One hotspot was in Central Ireland, situated around the Leitrim-Longford area, this area up here. And then down in the right-hand corner of the map, you can see the Wicklow, Carlow, Wexford area. So we had these 2 hotspots. And of course, this is very helpful if you're an adoptee, because it suggests that one of your parents may have come from Longford and the other one might have come from the Wicklow, Carlow, Wexford area. And as it turned out, this is exactly what he found, that his father's side was from Wexford and his mother's side was from Longford. So because these ethnicity estimates are getting more granular, they're getting more fine detailed, it is now possible to make much better use of them than it would previously have been. And so, for example, as it turned out, and this is a fictional case, but this is the surname distribution maps for the name Farrell and the name Byrne, and this would have been based on population data from the 1850s, and you can see that Farrell occurs in the Longford area, Byrne occurs in the Wexford area. And if these are names that appear in your family tree, then there is a correlation potentially here with the ethnicity estimate. And it may very well be that the DNA you're seeing here is from the Farrell branch of your family, and the DNA you're seeing in the Wexford area is from the Byrne branch of your family tree. So we'll be looking at ethnicity estimates and seeing just to what extent they can inform our subsequent analysis of our DNA matches. And these are your DNA matches. You'll have thousands of them. These are my dad's, and some of them have family trees. This first person has 4 people in their family tree, which is very helpful indeed. But you see that they also have this little tag that says common ancestor. Oh, sorry, I went back by mistake. And that can be very, very useful, this common ancestor link. The next person down has an unlinked tree, which basically they have not linked their DNA to their family tree. When you open their family tree, you may find that they are the home person, but there's no way of guaranteeing that. And then next people down the line have no trees at all, and then the final person has an unlinked tree as well. So this is one of the major challenges, because the DNA points you to some other person. It says you 2 people are related to each other. You might be 4th to 6th cousins. You share this amount of DNA, but you and you are related. Now go away and find out how. And to find out how, you need to have access to everybody's family tree. And one of the major stumbling blocks is not having access to comprehensive family trees for your DNA matches. And we'll be taking a long look at that in terms of how can you get that family tree, either through messaging the match, or if especially if the match does not answer you, how can you actually find your match online and see if they have a tree on some one of the other websites that are not linked to Ancestry, such as Genie or WikiTree or MyHeritage or Genes Reunited or some other website. So there are ways and means of tracking people down and getting the family tree information that you need. And that is very helpful when they don't reply or they have limited interest because they just wanted to see how much Viking they were. So we'll be spending some time looking at that. We'll also be looking at things like the colored dots system. I'll say more about that in a while. My dad has 35,000 matches. We'll be focusing on the top 10%, but we'll also be looking at some of the more distant matches because they can be very informative as well. So we'll be spending most of the presentations looking at how you manage your DNA matches. And we'll be talking about the step-by-step approach that I have promoted for the last several years, trying to make things as simple as possible. Step 1, where does the common ancestor sit? Step 2, is the common ancestor obvious? Step 3, eliminating non-contenders for the common ancestor by using several tricks that we can use with a variety of tools, or Y-DNA, mitochondrial DNA, and X-DNA. And then step 4 is about triangulation and clusters, working in groups or clusters of shared matches. And that really has taken off in the last 12 to 24 months since the introduction of things like the auto-clustering tool by Everett Jan Blom, rather, and the incorporation of that tool into GEDmatch and also into MyHeritage. And you've got also, we'll talk a little bit about those clustering tools later on. But those are the 4 steps that we'll be looking at. And I think we'll be spending a lot of time on step number 4, triangulation and clustering, and how we can use these newest tools. And no doubt there'll be a new tool on the market before we even get to September and these 8 presentations, and I'll be talking about those new tools as well. Like I say, the ultimate goal is to compare trees. You and somebody else share some DNA together, you're a DNA match. The important thing is to compare trees, and you're looking for common locations, common surnames, and ultimately the same individual in both trees. So we'll be spending some time on how to make your tree, how to optimize your tree, so that when you do share it, you've got as much information as is needed by your match to help them identify where you may sit. So we will look at ways that you can optimize this little pedigree chart or ancestral chart that provides as much information as you should include to share with your matches. Step 1, where does the common ancestor sit? A very useful tool to help answer this question is Johnny Pearl's shared centimorgan tool. So we'll be spending some time looking at this particular tool, but also looking at the science behind it, because this tool was developed by Johnny Pearl, Leah Larkham, and Andrew Millard using some very, very fancy statistics, but it was inspired by the brilliant work that was done by Blaine Bettinger on the shared centimorgan project. And I want to take you through some of the diagrams and bar charts, frequency distributions that he uses in the shared centimorgan project, because that has very important implications for the work that we're going to do with our matches. And we'll be coming back to those tools during the course of the presentations, because when you start looking at your top matches, you're going to be looking at a very skewed subset of your overall matches, and we'll be looking at what implications that has and how we can find a way around them. Step 2 is the common ancestor obvious, and for this you need to compare trees, again looking for any common locations, surnames, and individuals. Step 3 is eliminating non-contenders, and there are a variety of tools that we can use for that. Ethnicity, nationality. If you have one grandparent who's Irish, another who's Japanese, another who's African, another who is English, and you get a match to a Japanese person, well, it has to be your Japanese grandparent through which the DNA has come. That helps focus your research. The same can be said of US colonial ancestry, or Irish ancestry, or English ancestry. So there's some very, very useful, I find this one the most useful for focusing on a particular portion of your match's family tree. You can also use Y-DNA, mitochondrial DNA, and X-DNA to eliminate non-contenders from your ancestors as potential routes through which the shared DNA has passed. And then we'll be looking at visual phasing and how phasing your chromosomes can actually help you determine which ancestral line you should focus on. And we'll also be looking at chromosome painting, chromosome mapping, and how this can also help to eliminate non-contenders from your list of ancestors, but also what other functions chromosome mapping can assist with. And then step 4 is all about triangulation and clustering of shared matches. Triangulation has been around for many centuries because they've used it in trigonometry and geometry, and you can see it up here in this particular image. And the people on the near bank are triangulating on an object on the far bank. And that's what we do with family tree research. We, in the present, on the near bank, are triangulating back in time onto a common ancestor shared by 2 of us at least. And it was using this particular technique with 4 known cousins that I was able to identify that I was related to Captain Morgan. And I'll be telling you that story during the course of the presentations, because that is probably the easiest way to triangulate. Is if you have 4 known cousins, and in my situation I had my dad, his first cousin, his first cousin once, his second cousin once removed, and his second cousin twice removed. They all triangulated back onto a particular ancestral couple, my great-great-great-grandparents. And after 2 years of working with this group of shared matches that they identified, I was able to make a major breakthrough that connected me with royalty, Captain Morgan, and Princess Diana. So I'll be telling you that story and showing you what I did in the early stages before we had these additional wonderful tools that actually help you cluster your shared matches together. And a lot of this was developed by Everett Jan Blom. He set up the website Genetic Affairs, and he produced a tool that allows you to cluster your shared matches together. And this is one of the slides I'll be talking about. And you can see that here's one cluster of shared matches here. The idea is that all of these people, all of these shared matches, have a common ancestor. And all of these shared matches in the next green square down have a different common ancestor, and so on and so on and so on. So really what you should be getting is 4 large squares representing each of your 4 grandparents. And one group of shared matches is related to you via your father's father, another via your father's mother, another via your mother's father, and another via your mother's mother. And we'll be looking at spending a lot of time looking at how you can use these clusters of shared matches in your family tree. The other thing that we'll be looking at in step 4 is how to generate your own clusters of shared matches on Ancestry using the colored dots system. And then MyHeritage and GEDmatch have incorporated Everett Jan's tool into their websites. Family Tree DNA do not have an auto-clustering tool. 23andMe do not have an auto-clustering tool. So in those situations, you can use the Genetic Affairs website to generate data from these 2 companies. So there are ways and means of getting or generating clusters of shared matches for each of the companies where you have your DNA data. One of the major challenges is trying to get all of this individual company data into one big spreadsheet. But there are ways and means of doing that, and I will be discussing that with you during the presentations. Now, the other main way of clustering your shared matches together is to use the Collins Leeds method. And this is something that was developed by Dana Leeds and John Collins, and is hosted on the DNA GEDCOM website. So we'll be looking at also this particular auto clustering tool and how it can be used. And the other one that I want to introduce you to is one that's developed by DNA to Tree. And this was developed by David Neal. It's an expensive tool. It's, I think, $20 or $30 per month. It only works on iPads and iPhones. And I'm hoping by the time we come to our presentations that he's managed to introduce it to both Mac and PC platforms. But the big advantage of this is that it takes seconds for this particular tool to do its work. And it compares quite starkly with DNA GEDCOM, where the actual upload process for a lot of the tools takes quite a long time, whereas this one, DNA to Tree, is very, very fast, and I was very impressed with it when David asked me to test it out. So hopefully it will be available on your laptop by the time we come around to doing the virtual institute. Sticking with step 4, we'll also be looking at triangulated segments. These are identified on MyHeritage, but you can also identify them by a variety of other means as well. We'll be looking at that. We'll be also looking at the limitations of triangulated segments, because in many ways, if you're going to rely on triangulated segments, it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because it means ignoring a huge amount of data. And so they do have significant limitations, but despite that, they can be very, very helpful for making a breakthrough, but they can also be very, very useful if you are interested in writing up a genealogical proof of a particular conundrum that you have solved. So we'll be taking a look at triangulated segments from that point of view as well. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is the work that I do with adoptees and the adoptee worksheet template that I have developed, which allows you to see the connection between an adoptee and all of their closest matches. And in so doing, you can generate a family tree for the adoptee based on their DNA, which ultimately allows you to identify the grandparents on each side of the adoptee's family, and one of the grandparents' children will turn out to be the birth father, and one of the grandparents on the other side, children, will turn out to be the adoptee's birth mother. So we'll be looking at that process, and if you want to have a copy of the adoptee worksheet template, that's going to be freely available as well. It's simply an Excel file that has about 6 worksheets in it. So we'll talk through that. And we'll also be taking a look at various DNA tools. Now, we've talked about DNA Painter already in terms of the shared centimorgan tool, but there's a lot of other tools that Johnny Pearl has on his website. One that I want to talk about particularly is the What Are the Odds tool. And I use this a lot, especially when working with adoptees. But he's got some new tools that are coming out, such as the Cluster Auto Painter tool, which holds a lot of promise. And I want to take you through that and to show you what it does and what the implications are, the practical implications for how you can use it to actually help your DNA research. So that's the DNA Painter suite of tools. But there's other tools that could be very, very helpful in specific instances. One that I am particularly enamored with is ancestor reconstruction. We can actually reconstruct our ancestors if we have enough people tested, not just within our family, but also outside, unknown cousins who are related to this particular ancestor. We can reconstruct this ancestor. And one of the most important implications of that is that when you then compare this ancestor's DNA with everybody else in the database, then that can really help to distinguish that a potential fourth cousin for you was actually a second cousin twice removed for your ancestor. A potential fifth cousin for you might turn out to be a fifth cousin for your ancestor. So it helps you identify those more distant matches that you don't know, is it worthwhile pursuing these? It identifies those that probably are closer than you might think, because people who are in that lower range, say 20 centimorgans, that type of thing, they might jump up to 70 centimorgans with a reconstructed ancestor, or they might stay at 20. So it helps you identify the more distant matches that are worthy of further exploration. So that's ancestor reconstruction. And there'll be other tools as well that we'll explore during these presentations. And I'll be illustrating everything with case studies throughout. I've mentioned Princess Diana and Captain Morgan, and I've mentioned Winnie as well. But I'll also be talking to you about the mystery of the wedding memento and how it brought me to Australia, where there is absolutely nothing apart from murderers, poisonous snakes, man-eating koalas, and sharks with frickin' lasers. So that is what you have to look forward to on September the 8th and 9th. I hope you'll join me. And I'm sure there's probably a few questions that Christine has been collating over the course of the last 50 minutes or so. So I'll pass it back over to Christine. And if you have any questions, I would be more than happy to address them. So thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Morris. And I'm still just really glued to this this map of Australia and studying
Isn't it amazing? And isn't it so true?
Good grief. Okay, so some questions. How do you find the names and places map of Ireland to help pinpoint origins?
The names and places. So that would be the surname distribution map.
Sure.
That is on a website, which I shall bring up now on, let me just bring it up here so that you can see it. And S. Wilson. swilson.info is the name of the website. And this is Shane Wilson's website. He's got some fabulous things here, but his surname distribution map is here. And if we put in Farrell, you can see that all the Farrells are concentrated in Longford. So you can put in any number of surnames and it generates these lovely maps, and you can see that there were 5 woodcocks in Dublin in the 1850s. Isn't that amazing?
That is.
How did they get there?
Oh,
So it's very nice. It's based on the 1850 data. What was the surname of the person making that inquiry?
I think I don't think
No,
I've kept the question.
Not to worry, not to worry. But it's a very nice website, and I can bring people through that during the presentations as well.
Yeah, I tend to delete the question after I've asked it so that I don't ask it again.
Okay.
I've learned.
Very clever, very clever.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Gleeson, would you be willing to share the adoptee template with me? I'm an adoptee and I think I'm getting close. Thank you in advance.
Absolutely.
All right,
Just,
so
if you forward me the email address, I will email that adoptee worksheet template.
all right, Maria, if you want to email me afterwards, I will get that to Dr. Gleeson. What a fascinating virtual webinar this will be. Somebody is asking if the sessions will be available after they've taken place. Yes. So and somebody else is asking about the cost. So we are not opening registration until June the 1st because next week we're actually doing our Commonwealth virtual institute on the 4 Commonwealth countries. And then we're going to leave some time for the British Institute registrations to come in. And so on or around the 1st of June, we will be opening this. The presentations will be available for 6 weeks afterwards so that you can revisit them. And the cost will be, it's $139 for non-members of the society, and it's $139 for non-members and $124 for members. Okay, so somebody else is asking for the adoptee template, so I have their email and I will send that to you as well.
No problem at all.
All right. Yeah, that looks like that's it. So you got off quite light this time around.
Absolutely. I'm delighted.
Right.
Great.
All right. Okay. Yeah, 139 Canadian. No, it's a US based society, so all the fees are in US dollars. However, being Canadian, I always let them know that Canadians wouldn't be able to afford what they really want to set it at.
That's just pure evil.
I'm not sure if that's the Canadian part of me or the Scottish part of me, but it either.
Oh, love it.
Lord, my dad, I used to, the high school I went to had a number of kids from the Jewish Academy. I didn't even know we had a Jewish Academy until I got to high school. So I was well immersed in the Jewish heritage. My best friend was Jewish, and I did a lot of babysitting in the Jewish community. And I was babysitting one particular weekend, and it was the man was very, very orthodox, like more orthodox than I had ever seen. He had left the stove on because he wasn't allowed to touch it, and he had left the lights on because he wasn't allowed to touch them, and on and on. I had the baby for the day; they were walking off to shul. So, and he said to me, you know, for payment, I'm not allowed to handle money on a Saturday, so I've left you money on my dresser. Just take whatever I owe you. I said, oh, okay. So I'm like, I don't know, 14 years old or 15 years old. And my dad called and he said, how's it going? I said, well, this is like over the top for what I'm used to. He said, how much are you getting? I said, well, I don't know. I said, I don't know what to do. He said he can't handle money. He left me money and I don't know how much to take. And my dad said, tell you what, take it all, leave him a note and tell him you're Scottish and you can't leave change on a Saturday.
And that's the last time you were babysitting for that family.
That's the culture I grew up in.
Oh, I wish it was in your family.
Anyway, thank you for this, Morris. The recording takes a couple of hours for me to get it uploaded onto the website. It will remain as a public post until we open registration, probably up until we sell out. Dr. Gleeson's presentations, unlike the Commonwealth, is going to be live. So we are limited in seats. We have 98 seats available, and I know that many of those will fill up rather quickly. And once they're gone, they're gone. So thank you for this, and I will get those email addresses off to you for the template. All right, thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks everyone for listening, and look forward to seeing you all in September.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.